Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode 182, season 4, episode 22. We're closing in on the end of the second book, the book of Exodus. This week's portion is known as the portion of 𝗪𝗪, the second to last portion in the book. And a special reading this week also was something that's called 𝗪שת שקלים, when we reread the section that talks about the requirement for everyone in the nation to pay a half shekel, a half measure, to be counted in for a couple of other reasons, which we'll get to today. So let's begin by jumping into a win and a learning. The win of the week for me is the idea that tonight I get the opportunity to travel to the United States to visit with my parents. It's been a while, and I don't take these trips lightly, and I do look forward to them, but I don't get them too often, and unfortunately they're not as long as I'd like them to be. But that's a win. The win to get the opportunity to spend time, extended time, uninterrupted time together, just be together and enjoy each other's company, each other's presence. That's a big win. I don't think we take enough advantage of these kinds of opportunities, and we don't appreciate them necessarily as much as we could or that we should. But when we do get them, it's important that we have them, that we take advantage of them, and that we sit in them, and that we're present in them, and that we're holding them. I wrote about this week on LinkedIn, that we hold them to be holy and sanctified, and that we really create that kind of space with those opportunities as they come. So that's the win of the week. I think that's a big one. The learning of the week was this. I'm open book here with all these different kinds of things, and so I think this was important. Last week, someone I'm doing a project with sent me a text message that was sort of a subtle rebuke. I think some might call it passive-aggressive. I think the person might have thought they were being very open and very transparent, but lightly pressing. And I took it the way I think it was intended, or at least interpreted it in the way that I wanted to interpret it, which was that it was a subtle rebuke, that it wasn't something serious or dangerous or putting me in any sort of peril in any sort of way. And I thanked them for it, I think, which surprised them. I thanked them for it. I took the lesson, I got the message, and I have, sort of redoubled my efforts as it relates to them. I think that's a really power learning from a slightly uncomfortable moment. No one likes to get those kinds of things, but they come up, and we have to take them with the right way and not be what I'll call an excuse at all. Don't always have an excuse for when that comes. Someone calls you out, someone says, hey, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, what about this? Don't always excuse it. You might be able to explain it, but explaining it and excusing it are not the same things. And so don't become an excuse at all. That's a term I'm making up right now in these situations. Accept it for what it is, take it in, appreciate the learning that comes from it, and then go forward from there with the opportunity to repair it, to fix it, to redouble the effort, whatever that may be. That is my learning for the week. So that's the win, that's the learn. So our topic of the week is on having faith when all seems lost. This seems like not a leadership concept or a coaching concept per se, but I think it's an important one nonetheless. Over the years, and having worked in a lot of projects, you can't win them all and you can't get them all right. And at certain moments in those projects, in those things, in anything, stuff goes south. It goes bad. There's no other way to say that. And so when it looks bleak and it feels bleak and it feels like it's slipping away from you, so then in those moments, like, how do you have faith? How do you believe? How do you have hope? How do you go on in that situation? I think that's an important question. When you're the leader of the team, people are looking at you in those moments to step up, to either come up with the words, or probably not the words, but really to take the steps that are necessary in those moments to lead the way and to be someone that people can rely on and that can trust in those moments. There's a great quote that I saw from Martin Luther King, which is this: faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. And I think in certain moments like that, which are difficult, the leader needs to take that first step, even if the leader doesn't know where that actually ultimately goes. In the book that I talked about a lot in the last couple of weeks, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, he talks a lot about being a CEO without any experience. And so you dive into this role because you started a company, you have no idea what you're doing, and you're leading in those moments. And when it's not going well or it looks bad, and he talks about some pretty bleak moments for his companies. Ultimately, he's massively successful. But you can feel what that person is going through to some degree. And if you've actually lived it, then you certainly can commiserate and empathize with that space and be in it where that person is. And so having faith in those moments is really important as a leader. Again, it's an industry leader, it's a business leader, it's a team leader, it's a leader in a community, it's a leader in a home. When, again, situations come up, there's a tragedy, God forbid, something terrible happens, something doesn't work out, you find yourself in a situation financially that is very bad, whatever. People looking for you for faith in those moments when it seems lost. Having worked on, a couple of hundred fundraising campaigns, there were campaigns when it looked bad. We have a 48-hour period, and at the end of that first day, things look terrible. Money is not being raised, people aren't working hard, no one's answering the phone, no one's donating, and you're there with that leader, and they're sitting in it. And that's brutal, and there's not a lot you can do for that person in there. And so that's where I want to talk about. And the reason it comes up specifically this week, because actually it relates to the extra portion that's read this week, which is, as again, relates to the idea that in the Bible, the people of Israel are commanded to give a half shekel, a half measure of money, and in that case, in the case of that money, to be counted. So direct counting of the people wasn't to be done, and people weren't giving a full amount or a full measure, they were giving a half. And that half was used for a few things for the people. One was to count the people, so instead of counting people directly, we counted the halves, and by counting the halves, you got to understand and know how many people were in the nation. Interesting concept, maybe for a different year. Reason number two people gave that amount, that as a contribution really, as a donation, was that through the donation, the sacrifices, the offerings that were to be brought in the temple were purchased with the collective monies that were brought. And so everyone gave a piece, and in so doing, collectively, they were able to purchase all the things that were needed for upkeep, for the tabernacle in the desert, and ultimately for the temple in the Holy Land itself in Jerusalem. So that was second reason. So there's an idea about the collective responsibility or the collective involvement in the purchase of those items. So everyone sort of has, what you might say, some part of every single one of those offerings that are being brought in the temple, which makes a lot of sense. The third reason that's brought up actually is really seemingly different, is that the monies were used, or parts of the monies were used to fashion, to purchase the materials and then fashion the sockets that would go at the bottom of the walls in the tabernacle. In Hebrew, they're called the adanim. So every one of the different panels had sockets at the bottom, and to purchase those, they used some of this money. So it seems like an odd thing, like why that would be. And so what's the connection there? And so the first two things are very collective ideas. I get it. What's this third one? And so in Talmudic and Midrashic literature, they talk about the idea that those sockets being at the base of the walls of the tabernacle are symbolic and reminiscent and should be reminders of the idea of faith. It's foundational. And so when foundations are being built and planted, let's say it was an orchard or a forest, and planting the trees, so then there needs to be full participation from all the parties in solidifying and establishing that foundation. And so it's supposed to be a reminder for that. So it's super interesting, and therefore you couldn't just have a few people donate for that. Everyone had to donate for that. Everyone had to donate the same exact amount for that. And no matter where you were in the community, the expectation of your level of faith is the same. Meaning, there's a difference between somebody who's, let's say, gifted with genius, and they can really understand every deep concept and every spiritual and mystical and legal concept in Torah Judaism. That's amazing. or a person may be gifted with a high level of empathy or righteousness and kindness, and so the other aspects of working with other people is just natural to them. Not everyone's there. Some people are at different levels of that. But the basic foundational principle of faith is something that people had to have in equal measure. And so you would ask then the question, now this is a very long explanation, why then not give a full amount and a half amount? And here's the point. The reason is because the faith is always in the middle. The faith is always half. And what's described is this sort of very deep concept, which is this, that in the course of one's life, you may be lucky at all to see the fulfillment of something great and monumental in your lifetime. Maybe something miraculous, maybe something unbelievable, maybe something historically impactful that's going to last for generations, but the likelihood is that you won't. And you look at the course of history, maybe hundreds of years passed and nothing significant seems to maybe have been developed or designed or brought into the world during that period of time. And you have these sort of spurts or sprints, for lack of a better term, of innovation, of creation, creativity, but for the most part, a lot of the time doesn't. And so what happens is that for a lot of the time, you live in the dark. You live and exist in the bleak space when the faith is at its lowest. So I saw a great quote that sort of makes this point. This came from Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. So in the book, she makes the following statement. I didn't read the book, but I saw this quote. If we truly knew all the answers in advance as to the meaning of life and the nature of God and the destiny of our souls, our belief would not be a leap of faith. It would not be a courageous act of humanity. It would just be a prudent insurance policy. There's something to be said for having faith when no faith should be expected, when having real strong belief when it's dark and it's bleak and it's just terrible. The situation is not good. It's understandable in those moments to have a massive amount of doubt, and the idea that you might just walk away. And that's this idea here. Foundational belief, as hard as this idea is to sort of let it sink in, is the idea that we're always existing in the middle. So the example that's brought down in the different books is this idea that if you saw a person, planting a farm, and you only saw the middle of that process. You didn't see the beginning, you didn't see the end, you just saw the middle of this person working, maybe getting a few things out, and then having it threshed and having it run over. You'd be like, what is going on here? Or if you're in a process of a project like a campaign trying to raise $1 million and it's not going well, like at those moments, your faith is massively tested. Of course, in the cases of tragedies, of illness, of the unexplainable, your faith is tested. And you're sitting in it, and you're steeped in it, and it's brutal, and it's bad, and it's horrible. So what do you do? What do you do in those situations? I coach a lot of coaches too, and that's one of the questions that comes up. What happens when it's not going well? When they're not progressing? When the project isn't moving forward? I've been on those teams too, and it's just not working. And so I've seen some unbelievable leaders who have a lot of questions in those situations and have a lot of doubts, and they still take that first step into the unknown staircase, like I mentioned before, and they still go forward. They live with a lot of honest doubt. That's part of faith, is having questions. But you still lead in those moments. And so what are we supposed to do? What's the plan of action in those kinds of moments? So I think the first thing is this. Let's take a couple of steps. Step number one, I think it's massively important to sit in it for a little bit. To steep and stew and stress and struggle and have that anxiety and that tension and that pressure of that bleak and dark moment. The reason I think that's true is, one, so that in the case that someone else comes along who finds themselves in that space, you can be helpful to them. Two, I think so that when your next one comes, because it's going to come, that you know what that already feels like, and you can see it coming maybe from a little bit further away and be more prepared for it. We can also recognize the feeling when it's upon you. That's not a small thing. So that's first. I think you got to sit in it. I also think it helps you then get to the next part, which is getting out of it. And so while it is in the course of history, you live at a certain moment and you may not see the end. You see the beginning, right? The history of faith in the religious sense, at least in our faith, it's a, 4,000-year long process that's going on here. Abraham starts that faith and it's still going on, and the end of it hasn't yet been reached. We have had leaders who've had massive doubts. Look at the Psalms. David has many questions. Seems sort of very despondent at certain moments, very down. And yet he's able to prop himself back up. So I think it's important to sort of sit in it. That's first. Second is not to sit in it too long and then take a step, make a move. Do something. Something for you and something for everybody else that's surrounding you. That could be an expression of hope. That could be an expression of the sense that this is going to get better. This is the bleakest, the darkest moment. But our bleakest and darkest moment, I heard a great talk from someone by the name of 𝘕𝗏. Pretty sure it was 𝘕𝗏. That in our bleakest, darkest moments, our best moments can come right out of them. To do something, to say something, to make a move. One action. In the case of fundraising, what I would have people do is I'd have them make one call to a donor that hadn't yet donated, that they were very sure was going to donate. Just sort of to break through some of the din and the negativity, and to get a little bit of positivity. To create sort of a positive spin cycle there, get a little bit of flow towards success, to get the juices flowing. In basketball, it would be like after going 0 for 15, taking a shot that you always hit, like a foul shot, whatever that may be, and just seeing and feeling the ball go through the net, changing everything. So step one is to sit in it. Step two is take a small action, not a massive action, a small action. Step three is something that maybe you can do in advance the next time, which is to plan ahead. In the event that this doesn't go the way we want, can we have sort of a vertical approach to how we handle these kinds of situations going forward? What are we going to do? Who steps up in this emergency? Who's the phone call we have to make? Who's the person we need to bring in? Is there a speaker that we need to have? What I used to do a lot with campaigns, with organizations, with leaders, is to step inside the data. Let's see what's working. It's not all bad. It's mostly bad. It's really bad. But there are some, what you call, you might call it the silver linings. You might call it sort of the little bit of light that sort of breaks through. And so it's important to some degree to hold on to those things as well. So again, sit in it for a bit, make some sort of an action, right? I think that's really important. And then here, look at what the opportunity, number 3 is the opportunity to sort of be prepared in advance for the next one that comes. And number 4 is to see the wins that actually exist inside this massive moment of what feels like gigantic defeat. I think those 4 things can really help you as a leader get through an exceptionally difficult moment that you might be sitting in there. So I think the Bible is teaching us this massively important lesson, because I think it's one of the things that we need to really be mindful of all the time. It's never going to go 100% perfect, and it doesn't always go perfect or well in the case of who we are and how we live. So it's important to have this appreciation for having faith when all seems lost. And to finish it out, as always, we finish with a quote. This is a quote from Rabbi Sachs. It goes like this: "Faith is not certainty. It is the courage to live with uncertainty. It is not knowing all the answers." That is Coaching the Bible for this week. Have a great, great week. See you next week when I get home. Back to Israel. Take care.